All right, so let's get to the al-Kitab. As I said, there are three ayat in the Quran which have this phrase al-Kitab. And I think one has to go through all three in order to, of course, come to not a complete understanding of it, but an adequate understanding. I don't think we can understand anything completely, but we want to try to get as adequate an understanding as we can. The first one is in Surah 3, Surah Imran,
Okay.
and it's in Ayah 7. And I believe in the file here, I'm using A.J. Droge's translation, which right is I like it. It's good. It's on the literal side, but of course, anyone who knows Arabic and who studied the Quran, right, is always going to have some differences of opinion, right, about various translations. But when the important thing about this particular ayah is that it's declaring that the Quran has two types of verses, right? So it has verses that are muhkamat, right, that we could say clear or decisive, right? And then there are other ayat that are mutashabihat, and that's ambiguous or unclear. And these, I think we can say that they correspond to the exoteric and the esoteric senses. Another way we could put it is elsewhere in the Quran, we hear the Quran described as the Kitab Mubin, right, which is a clear or a revealed Kitab or revelation. And the opposite of that is the Kitab Maknoon, right? That is Surah 56, Ayah 78, which is the hidden or the concealed revelation or writing. Right? Now, the point that this ayah is making is that it's the muhkamat, it's the decisive, it's the clear, it's the so-called exoteric ayat or verses that are the al-Kitab, which are the mother of the book. Now here, the sense of mother of the book is slightly different from the sense of it in the other two ayat, but let's deal with this one. Here, the al-Kitab means the authority of the book, right? So the foundation of the book are these clear verses, right? And in the Bavli, that's the Babylonian Talmud, we have two phrases, and we can put them together. It's like yesh em la mikra va yesh em la masorat, and that is the reading or the recitation has its mother, and the spelling, right, has its mother. And that means that the traditional recitation of the Torah is authoritative, and the traditional consonantal text of the Torah is authoritative. It's the M, the mother, right? And so it's these authoritative verses that you can use to establish halakha, or that is Sharia or religious laws, right, in Islam. Now, it's important to note that this word mikra in Hebrew, right, which is the reading or the recitation, which has its mother M, right, is cognate with the Arabic word Quran. Right, right. So I think it's relatively clear that this verse is using Kitab in this sense which we find in the Bavli, right? So that means means the authority, right? So these are authoritative, but it's a bit complex actually, and rich and profound what's going on here, because this esoteric and the exoteric layers of the Quran actually at some point have to coincide. But before we get to that point, right, if we look at Surah 39, Ayah 23, right, it says that God has sent down a good or a beautiful hadith, narration, that's the Quran, and it says it's mutashhabiha, right? It's an allegorical or an esoteric writing, right? A repetition, matni, and we discussed this last week, that I would even translate this, right? God has sent down a beautiful narration an esoteric writing, a Mishnah, right? As in Hebrew. The Mishnah, which has 6 orders, right? It's basically the oral Torah, and Mishnah means repetition. Why? Because that's how you learn, right? So it's didactic, right? But what I want to point out though is that, all right, so Quran 3 ayah 7, right, says that the Quran has these 2 types of verses, exoteric and esoteric, right? And this Surah 39:23 says God has sent down an esoteric writing or revelation, esoteric book. And so I think from another standpoint, you can say that the Quran, there's one way of looking at it, is that the whole thing has an exoteric sense, and the whole book has an esoteric sense. And so you can look at it as, right, as containing both of these senses, or you can look at it from another angle and say the whole thing's exoteric, and you can look at it from another angle and say the whole revelation is esoteric, right? Because ultimately, I believe that this dyad, this binary of the outer and the inner, has to be united, and they come together like the confluence of the 2 seas, right, in the story of Moses and Khidr that we talked about before, right? And in any case, to get back to Surah 3 and ayah 7, Angelika Neuwirth, I've pointed this out, right? So this point is, she's explained, I think lucidly, that this al-Kitab, yes, it has this very technical sense, the authority of the book, right, for purposes of interpretation and halakha. In Judaism, we call it halakha, and Sharia, right, in Islam. She points out that right before this verse, right, we read in verses ayat 5 and 6, which I show here. Surely God, nothing is hidden from him on the earth or in the sky. He it is who fashions you in the wombs as he pleases. There is no God but him, the mighty, the wise. And all right, so, and then after ayah 7, right, after that, in that surah, which is named after the father of the Virgin Mary, we have the history of the Virgin Mary and of Isa, or Jesus, right? And so what Neuwirth is pointing out is that this al-Kitab is also subtly hinting in an anticipatory way at the upcoming story of the virginal conception in the womb of Mary, right, of Jesus, who is a kalam, of God. And so there is this subtle theological connection between the al-Kitab, the mother of the book, and the mother of Jesus. And it's actually quite profound, and I believe that it works this way, right? So we see in Surah 19, which is named after Maryam, the mother of Jesus, there are more instances of the divine name al-Rahman, right, than any other surah. Now, this divine name al-Rahman, right, is cognate with the Arabic noun for womb. And a hadith Qudsi, right, has God saying that I have named the womb, the Rahm, after my name al-Rahman. So there is this awareness that there is some kind of connection between the womb and God in his name al-Rahman. So there is this subtle theological connection, right, between this story about Mary's womb, right, which gives birth to a word of God or a speech of God, kalam Allah, right, and al-Rahman. And of course, right, this is at the heading of every chapter of the Quran, save one, right, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So it's in the very foundation of Islam, right, this maternal aspect of God and the maternal aspect of revelation. And as I said, because this divine name ar-Rahman, which we find in the Basmala, occurs the most times in Surah 19, that there seems to be this subtle connection with the story of Mary and her womb, and this divine aspect of this maternal aspect of God. And in Surah 3, we see that it's related to this term al-Kitab, mother of the book. which Neuwirth points out. Suddenly now, if you put Mary into the formula or the recipe here, then it brings to mind the Christian title, right, of Mary as the mother of the Word. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. She also points out, right, that in near this story of the conception of Mary, and then Mary growing up, and then the conception of Jesus in Mary's womb. All right, so in Surah 3, ayat 26 and 27, right, she points out that in ayah 26, which I have listed there for you, that we have an echo of what's called the Magnificat. This is a prophetic song of the Virgin Mary, which you find in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 1. And then in verse 27, ayah 27, right? Right. So we have God saying there that you know, you speaking to God, you cause the night to pass into the day, and you cause the day to pass into the night. You bring forth the living from the dead, and the living from the and the dead from the living. Right. So now this actually does not have a parallel in the Magnificat, but it does have a parallel in the Song of Hannah in the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 2, right, in the Hebrew Bible. And this song is the one that has inspired, right, the Magnificat, which we find in Luke 1. So that we see that Quran here not only knows the Magnificat in Luke, it knows the background text of the Magnificat, because the Magnificat, echoes certain parts of Hannah's song, but not other parts which are included in the Quran there in ayah 27. Now in ayah 29 of Surah 3, right, we read say, right, it basically says that God knows everything, right? And that's exactly how we read the song of Hannah translated in the Targum, right, where it says in the Masoretic text, it says that God is a God of knowledge, right? But in the Targum, it says, it expands that to say that God knows everything. And that's exactly what we read word for word in Surah 3, ayah 29. And not only that, but as I point out there, there's an element in Surah 3, 26, 27, that we don't find in the Magnificat or in Hannah's song, but we do find it in the reworking of Hannah's song in what's called the Pseudo-Philo's Biblical Antiquities, an ancient text, and I've quoted it there for you. Here that the Lord kills with judgment and quickens in mercy. He quickens the righteous when he will, the ungodly he shuts up in the darkness, but the righteous he preserves their light. Etc., etc. So we see that the Quran is intimately aware of multiple sources, right? That has a detailed knowledge, right? So not just something that someone could have gathered from conversations in the marketplace or listening to homilies or things like this. There's detailed knowledge of texts and their biblical intertexts. All right. So be that as it may, right? All right. So that's the first instance of al-Kitab. And before we leave there, which I'm ready to do now, but before we leave there, let's go back. And I want to point out something there in ayah 7 of Surah 3. And I give Drozha's translation, as you see there, but you see at the bottom of it, I say or, right? And what I'm pointing out there is you'll notice that in Drozha's translation, he says that that its interpretation, right, is known to no one except God. And as for the ones firmly grounded in knowledge, they say, we believe in it. Well, you see that he's put the words as for in parentheses because there's nothing corresponding to that in the Arabic text. So this can be translated and punctuated differently, right? So what Drozha is doing is following the Sunni interpretation. Now, what I give an alternative there is it would be in line with the Shia understanding, and it would say no one knows its interpretation as Tawil except God and the ones firmly grounded in knowledge. Period. They say we believe in it, etc. So I just wanted to point out that those two punctuation possibilities, right? And also the interpretations, the word tawil, and in the Quran, this word is not too common, but it is most common in Surah Yusuf, where it's applied to the interpretation of dreams, right? And so, just in passing, I want to mention that I do believe that, right, there is a science of tawil which uses the dream process, right, in order to achieve interpretation. And that's similar to what we discussed last week in the Torah. In Numbers 12, God says that with all prophets except Moshe, except Moses, with all prophets, he gives revelation. He speaks to them in visions and in dreams, right, in riddles, right? And so it's possible that one of the methods, techniques of Tawil, right, could be the cultivation of prophetic dreams, right, to interpret. But be that as may. All right, let's go to the second instance of this term al-Kitab in the Quran, and it's the 13th surah and the 39th verse, which I've put in a little table. And here I've translated this literally myself. Right? It's very difficult for me to find a satisfactory translation of this. So I've translated it quite literally. Right? For everything, a time is prescribed or written. What he wills is taken away and confirmed by God, and with him is the mother of the book, or the mother of the revelation. Literally, it's a book, but I believe it's a symbol. Most scholars now believe it's a symbol for the process of revelation. But still, the symbol literally is book. So let's put it that way. So, and with him is the mother of the book. All right. So with him is anticipating the final passage we're going to look at. But before we do that, I'll very quickly point out that I believe this verse is a divine echo, right, of Kohelet, or Ecclesiastes 3:1 in the Hebrew Bible, where we read, "For everything there is a season and a time," right? So a time for everything, or literally in Hebrew, it's on a will, right, which sort of nicely, I think, is echoed in the Ayah 39 of the 13th Surah. All right. Before we go on, do you have anything that you want to add, Aria?
Yeah, I wanted to go back and sort of reiterate the verse in the Quran, verse 7.
Yeah, in Surah Imran.
Surah Imran. It talks about that no one knows this interpretation except God, and the expression, the rasikhuna fil ilm, the ones
yes.
Firmly established in knowledge. And so obviously there's a group of people who are appointed to bring together the convergence of the exoteric and the esoteric. And so I think that type of successorship, human appointed successorship of God's words, is something that is very critical to having this connection with what the words mean. And in fact, I would even say that this also points to the embodied nature of the words, the oral and relational nature of the words, that when the Quran or any divine scripture is referencing revelation or a book, it's not necessarily talking about something in a manuscript.
Right.
It's talking about a person who is being communicated to. So, from Moses to Joshua, and on and on. You know, there's some type of divine chain. And then with the story of Islam, that would be the Prophet Muhammad, and then the 12 Imams, especially when you take the Shia point of view.
Mhm.
And then after them, there's successors. So, you know, this is a very critical point for anyone who wants to engage and understand these scriptures, that the source of knowledge is not the written text, it's the oral, and it's the person who God has chosen.
Yeah, that would be somewhat similar, right, to the Jewish model, right, where it's just not that we have the Torah in the written form, and also it's just not that we have the oral Torah, right?
Sure.
But there are always, we call them the rabbis, of course, there are always, there's always the need for the living interpreter, right? The trained living interpreter, right? And in any case, right, there's that debate among the Sunni and the Shia on that verse and the punctuation of it.
And of course, there is no punctuation in the written, in the
that's
Semitic
right.
languages.
That's
So,
why there's the debate, right? Because one can divide it semantically as one wishes, right? And so and put pauses where one wishes. I would say it's, as I mentioned there, you see that Droge, right, is translating according to the Sunni interpretation, and it even leads him to put material in there in parentheses, right, that's not in the Arabic text, and actually, you know, I think interferes with the flow of the text, right, and right, so right, so now if we can move on to the third instance of this term al-Kitab, which is in Surah 43, and it's the last one, and I think it's the richest one. It's the most profound, most intriguing one. So, um, all right. So let's just look like at the left column for now in this little table at Surah 43. I have the first four ayat. Ha Mim, right? These mysterious disconnected letters. Ha Mim. Right, and this is Droge's translation again by the Clear Book. Surely we have made it an Arabic Quran so that you may understand. And surely it, that is this Quran, is in the al-Kitab, in the mother of the book, with us, most high, indeed wise. All right, the first thing I want to point out here is that I would put most high. I would put the M and the H, right, in uppercase. This is a divine name. So it should be, this is the name of God, most high, right? And other than that, I want to point out first the mysterious letters Ha Mim. And notice that this word Hakim, the divine name or epithet which ends ayah 4, right? The first letter is Ha and the last letter is Mim. So I think that there is like this anticipation, right, of this word Hakim, Ha Mim. Before I give some other exegesis of these other ayat, I want to concentrate on that Ha Mim by looking at Surah 42, which I have there beneath the table, as you see. It starts off with these mysterious letters also, Ha Mim, and then Ain, Sin, Qaf, right? And then it's that, right? Kadalika. That is the way he inspired you and those who were before you. All right, so God the Mighty, the Wise, Hakim. All right, and then if you notice the next verse ends, right, with the divine name Most High, Ali, right? And so, all right, that's interesting. Now, let's go on to Surah 31. All right, it starts off with the same thing. Aleph, Lam, Mim, these mysterious letters. Those are the letters with signs or letters, right? So ayah can also mean letter, right? So those are the letters of the book, right? So if you look at that, what I pointed out there is this term, tilka ayatu al-Kitab, right? If you look at the last letter of each of those three words, you'll see that it spells out the word kitab, right? So what's going on with all of that? All right, so ayah 40, I mean, Surah 42, ayah 2, right? It has these 5 disconnected letters, mysterious letters, and it says that is the way he inspired you and the prophets before you. What way? Those letters. By disconnected letters, by disconnected mysterious letters, that's the method, that's the technique of inspiration, of divine inspiration. So it's the al-Kitab is a wordless matrix of revelation. As it descends to the mind of a prophet, it before it becomes fully syntactical and fully grammatical and in complete sentences that make sense, there's an intermediate stage, sort of a babbling stage almost, of just individual letters, like this intermediate, right? And it's called "This is the way." This is how we inspire, is through these disconnected letters. And the same thing is being said in Surah 31, right? Aleph Lam Mim. Those are the letters of the book, right? So it's the intermediate stage, right, of the descent, right, of the pre-verbal heavenly al-Kitab, right? All right, so that's a very intriguing point. And we might want to discuss that, but first I want to make this other point. We go back to Surah 43, verse 4. Surely it is in the mother of the book. So even though it descends, right, the non-verbal, pre-verbal manifestation is still in heaven in the Kitab, in the mother of the book. But it's with us, Most High, indeed, wise. All right, so in this dyadic collocation of Most High and Wise, Ali and Hakim, this occurs nowhere else in the Quran in that sequence except in Surah 42, just a few verses before this passage at the opening of Surah 43. And in Surah 42, we have in ayat 51 and 52, this passage we read last week and discussed last week, how God reveals through wahi. And then you'll see that ayah 51, where the subject is inspiration and revelation, ends with surely he is the Most High, the wise. Right, and so there's a connection with that and this passage in Surah 43, because it was discussing the Quran, the Kitab, and the Kitab, right, and the descent of this, so which is involving revelation and inspiration. All right, so right, all right, so. And in that table, I point out something we don't need to discuss, but very quickly, right? In ayah 7 of Surah 42, this shows how the Quran is put together intentionally. It's just not scattered. So in Surah 42, ayah 7, we read this phrase, mother of the cities. And this term, right, Qura, for city, is actually cognate with Quran, with the word Quran. And this is the mother of the cities. And then, right, so a few verses later in the next surah, the opening of the next surah, we come across this again, al-Kitab, mother of the city, mother of the book, right? So what's the relation there? Well, the mother of the city, this is, of course, probably referring to Makkah, most people think, but it's based on the symbology of the holy city, Jerusalem, right? And so there's something holy about this city. And in Jewish texts of the Second Temple period, there is a close connection between the heavenly Jerusalem and the heavenly Torah. Right, and so I believe that's the relationship between this mother of the cities and the mother of the book in these two surahs. Anyway, do you have any comments or questions before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is very powerful connection between the mother of the cities and the etymology of the word Quran. I think it reinforces the point we were making earlier. It also reminds me of the narration of the Prophet Muhammad, who says, "I am the city of knowledge, and Ali is the gate." Again, pointing to that sort of successorship and that embodied nature of the revealed word and that person who represents that. And the other point I think is important here is sort of the whole theme of the disjointed letters or the mughata'at, that these are emphasizing sort of the nature of formation pre-creation, pre-physical creation, that the letters sort of they came into being first, and they are this divine codex, this divine system through which information and communication is transferred and translated into the physical world.
Yes, there is a sense, I believe, that we can talk about the al-Kitab, right? And I say it's pre-verbal, right? And so what comprises it? I believe that, I mean, symbolically speaking, we could say it consists of the divine letters, but the divine letters in a non-stable or pre-stable form, right? So they're constantly in shift, and you can't pin them down, right? That happens only as this wordless matrix, right, makes its way into creation on the level of birth in the mind of a prophet. Right, and then at that level, I believe that these disconnected letters, right, involve an actual technique of generation of an inspired utterance. And it's I know it's a very dark, a very enigmatic concept, but in the Torah we read about this Urim Thummim. And it's this, in the high priest had a breastplate, right, with stones on it. And there are many in the Jewish tradition who believe that these stones had letters on them, individual letters, and that this was used as a technique, right, to receive messages. It was like an oracle, right? And I believe there's something very similar that's being implied here, right? So sort of 42. Right? So Hamim, Ain, Sin, Qaf. That is how he inspires you, and how he inspired the prophets before you, right? Through through sequences of single letters, right? And then you put the letters together and you get a message, right? And so in any way, right, this seems to be an intermediate stage between the pre-verbal and then, right, letters by themselves, and then, right, letters that form entire words and entire sentences, right? So you go from syntax to semantics. Yeah, it's quite intriguing. The lastly on this, I've listed a few verses from the book of Sirach, which is a Jewish text, where we have this correlation between wisdom and the divine name Most High, right? So it's very similar what we see here in the Quran, where we have Ali Hakim, right? The Most High and the wise. And so I'm showing you that Lady Wisdom is speaking there in Sirach 24. And she says she came from the mouth of the Most High. But you see, this name Most High proliferates, right? When Lady Wisdom is speaking. Now, according to this chapter, Lady Wisdom then becomes incarnate, if you will, in the Torah, in the book of Moses. So she appears on earth. Right? Christianity, they say Jesus was the embodied word of God. In Judaism, the Torah, the heavenly Torah, who is Lady Wisdom, right, in Proverbs chapter 8, right, becomes manifest on earth in the words of the Torah, orally or textually, but especially in the scroll of the Torah, right? Now, this brings up an important point. If you scroll down in the file there, I have some other verses. Let's see where I have them. Here we go. Yeah, it's at the top of the page there, right? So this says the al-Kitab is with us, Ladina, with us, right? And this, and notice that this al-Kitab is the Kitab that receives these two divine names. It is the Most High. She, the mother of the book, is the Most High and the wise. This is mind-boggling, right? So in some sense, this mother of the book is divine, right? And I'm not going to try to define in what sense, but clearly that is the case. Two divine names are assigned to it. And Islamic Qur'anic exegetes agree that these two epithets are assigned to the book, not to God in that verse. So it says it's with us, but the two divine names, everyone agrees, are referring to the book, not to the us. And so this book, this mother, is the same as Lady Wisdom in the Jewish tradition, who is the Torah. It's a personified way of understanding the Torah in heaven, right? And in the book of Proverbs, I have it listed there, 8:30. The Lady Wisdom again is speaking. Then was I by him. That is the same concept, with him, right? At the beginning of creation. And the famous opening of the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, pros, which means toward, right? Which is exactly how you would translate the Arabic preposition lamed, right? Which you see there, with us, right? All right, so this is extremely profound. That's all I can say. With us is the mother of the book, right? So this Jewish concept, I believe, right, is congruent with what we're seeing here. There is the heavenly Torah, which is a person, which is personified in the ancient Jewish texts, right? And this is precisely what we're seeing in Surah 43. Right now, I would say that you recall in Surah 17, Ayah 79, right? We read there, it may be that your Lord will raise you up to a praised position. And the word praise there is Mahmud, which most scholars, I don't have it listed there, so I'm just reading. Most scholars believe that Mahmud is a pun, right, on the name Muhammad. Right, and so that opens up the possibility that there are other passages, right, in the Quran where various words might represent puns on the names, right, of other human beings involved in that story, the origins of Islam. And so I wonder, I don't know, I wouldn't know how it would work out specifically, but here in Surah 43, verse 4, where it's talking about the al-Kitab being Ali, right, this Most High, that perhaps, that could be a pun on the name of the cousin, right, of the Prophet of Islam, right, whose wife, of course, was the daughter of Muhammad, that is Fatima, who in Shia tradition actually is, would sort of be related to this al-Kitab, right, in various senses. In a similar way, that I think the Quran is implying that the Virgin Mary, right, has some relation to this Kitab. Right, as I was pointing out when we were discussing Ayah 7 in Surah 3, right, which frames the whole story of Maryam and Jesus, or Maryam and Isa. But be that as it may, there's a lot to think about and a lot to ponder in these three verses, right, in the Quran, which have this phrase, al-Kitab. And before I make a final point, I was just wondering if you have anything to add, Aria.
I think the point about the puns and sort of the nature of the letters, especially at the level of al-Kitab being dynamic and not being static,
Right.
because there's clearly a tendency in the written text towards a static view of the letters, words, and meanings.
Right.
And I think when there's these deliberate sort of disjointed letters or puns or rearrangement of letters, I think it draws our attention that the nature of the heavenly Torah, the heavenly book, the al-Kitab is not like the way we experience words in the physical realm, which tends to be on a page and on ink. It's more static.
Right.
And again, I think this reinforces the point of the need for a more dynamic view of language, a more embodied person, relational, that allows us to have a relationship with the words. And I think this helps bring together the exoteric, the esoteric, the objective and the subjective. And more importantly, I think, though, it reminds us that meaning is transcendent. It transcends the physical characteristics that we tend to confine language to.
And also language as in the written texts, right, of religious books.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
Khalil, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and one of the most important implications of that is to not become so authoritarian in the literal meanings of text. And that's what we see a lot of times in religious dogmatism, is that, they become extremely attached to the literal. And I think this approach and this concept is very critical towards countering that.
Yeah, Khalil Andani, he likens the original Quran, right, and that was the oral delivery of these messages by the Prophet of Islam. The original Quran, this is like the GPS systems in our cars, right? It functions on a live basis, right? And meets our needs right at this moment, what we need at this moment. Whereas the written Quran, which is sort of a paradox, a contradiction in terms, right? It should be called the Musaf, and that's what it actually is technically, right? The Musaf. It shouldn't have the word Quran on these books, right? It's the Musaf. The Musaf is like a paper map, right? And you have to try to figure it out the best you can, and you may or not be able to decipher it, and so you may or may not get to your destination, right? Now, admittedly, and this again, Khalil Andani points this out as well, right? That Muslims do recognize that the Mus'haf, right? If one's heart is pure and one is seeking God, you can use this paper map, right? You can use this written text to use it as sort of a technique, and it's a door, becomes a door or a gateway, right, to the living voice of God, right? And we have the same idea in Judaism, and that is that when we read the Torah, we are the written text of the Torah is this spiritual tool that takes us back to Sinai, to the revelation of Sinai itself, so that you then transcend the text and you get back to the actual event, which is eternal and timeless, right? And so then it becomes this living Torah again, a spoken Torah. And so that brings me to this final point here, which is sort of technical. Right, I'm referring to the work of a linguist, Emile Benveniste. Now he I have in case anyone wants to look it up, right? He wrote an excellent article where he showed that Aristotle's 10 categories of being. So, the philosopher Aristotle had this idea that there are 10 aspects to being. Right? So it's very philosophical. But what Ben Venise showed was that actually Aristotle's 10 categories of being are nothing other than 10 categories of the Greek language. So Aristotle was mistaking the Greek language and the grammar and rules of grammar for being itself. And so if you think about it, as Ben Venise points out in this article, if you speak an indigenous language, for instance, your understanding of what being could be very different from what a person's understanding of being might be who speaks a different language like Greek or Arabic, for instance, even, right? And so he also points out in this same book, in a chapter called Subjectivity in Language, he argues that even the human ego is a linguistic construct, right? So we form our ego when we're infants because we're hearing constantly our names, right? Oh, Samuel, Aria, Samuel, and then all sorts of other words, we're hearing it. And finally, right, at a certain point, it clicks. And oh, yes, I am this word that I've been hearing. I am Samuel, right? And so he argues that even our ego, our self-identity, not our total consciousness, but that narrow band which we call the ego, is a linguistic construct. It is purely linguistic. All right, so anything we say or think about the mysteries of existence, right, are going to be expressed in a specific human language. And so that language will limit our thoughts, right? And anything we think will have a sort of veil or a limitation. It's by default, it's by definition. All right, and even we ourselves, our consciousness as our egos, it's limited by language. So even our own self-knowledge is limited, right, by definition. So what's this have to do with the Quran, with the Torah, right, with all revelations, all religious revelations are expressed in human languages. And so each of those human languages, whether it be Greek, Hebrew, Arabic, they come with their own cognitive and semantic limitations, right? And so the revelation, when it is expressed in created words of human languages, right, can by no stretch of the imagination, right, literally contain and express, right, the infinitude, right, inherent in the pre-verbal, right, heavenly matrix of revelation, right, and right, so that's one point. Now, another point is, at the same token, right, there can be an infinite, potentially infinite, unending degree of contemplation, right, on the revealed words, right? And that can go on forever because the words themselves are finite, right? But they do have a connection to the infinite, but pre-verbal, right? So you can always access that infinite, right, through the finite. But it is idolatry, I would argue, to identify the literal words, right, with the infinite, the finite words with the infinite, and that's the problem that you were referring to earlier.
Yes, absolutely. I think the dynamic nature of meaning and the transcendent nature of meaning really forces us to acknowledge the limitations of the physical aspects of language, what we can call the flesh of language, and oscillate between sort of what we are encountering at the level of the literal and move towards the meanings that are obviously referring to something transcendent. And this, reminds me of Plato's cave allegory, where, the shadows to me are the words that are on paper, but they're pointing to some meaning that is beyond the shadows and beyond the cave and
beyond themselves.
And we have to constantly remember this principle, because otherwise it's easy for our physical tendencies, just like the infant has a tendency to develop their ego around a particular sequence of sounds. But in reality, their identity is much more than that name that they're given. And so, it's kind of ironic in our developmental process, we need that sort of concrete stability just to be able to get to a certain age. But then once we get to a certain level of maturity, we're able to go beyond those egocentric senses of meaning. But it's not actually very easy to do. You have to have a certain discipline and a certain way to be able to go beyond what the ego has wrapped its mind around.
Well, Heraclitus, the pre-Socratic ancient Greek philosopher, said, "You never walk in the same river twice." Not because the river's always flowing. Well, that reminds me of Ibn al-Arabi, right? The probably the greatest Sunni Sufi mystic. Right? He would say that you never read the same ayah twice. Right? And I think the point is, self-evident. What I mean is that it's always shifting, right? And if you are reading the same ayah twice, then there's a little bit of idolatry in there of the text. You're turning the finite into the infinite, right? But so you never read, and it's not the exact words that Ibn Arabi uses, but that's a point that is well known that he makes throughout his writings. The text of the Quran never has the same meaning. Every time you read it, it will have a different meaning. So you never read the same ayah twice, just like you never cross the same river twice.
Yeah, I mean, in linguistic anthropology, Irving Goffman talked about framing and how essentially, we need these frames to be able to focus. It's a useful tool for learning. Because we need time and space in order to begin to learn the infinite, because we are inherently finite beings, but we are also have this aspect of the infinite. But time and space has been provided for us to be able to slow down a process that's happening instantaneously. And so I think we can draw that analogy to all of our learning. I mean, everything is working at a speed that's much higher than we can learn. And so whether you're learning anatomy or you're learning chemistry or you're learning any subject, whenever we do analysis and break things apart, that's only for pedagogical and learning purposes.
Right.
But its reality and how it really functions is not that. And so we have to be made aware of that. And I think scripture obviously knows this and tries to remind us of that. And so we're constantly we have to fight that that tendency of the lower ego and the self that wants to confine things in time and space.
Yeah, language itself is a manifestation of space-time. It's bound within space-time. You have the tenses of language, right? Past, present, and future grammatically. And you speak within time, right? And so this is part of, as I say, the linguistic ego, Benveniste would say, right? But that is embedded within a larger matrix of consciousness, right? So our consciousness is not just the narrow band that we call the ego. So there's much richer, even unconscious depths in our consciousness, right? Right, and there, right, that's space and time are a lot more fluid, right? So already when we have dreams, right, space and time becomes more fluid and plastic, even in dreams, because we're getting down there, farther away from our ego, right? And so again, the words of any language, even a religious text, those words, right, are manifestations within space and time, right? And so they cannot be identified with the words of God, literally, which would, right, be nonverbal and eternal, right, pre-verbal, right? And right, so again, yeah, so we do need the narrow bandwidth of consciousness we call the ego. Without it, right, we'd become mentally unstable and end up in a lunatic asylum, right? So we do need that structure. And yet with maturity, as you say, right, there is this ability, right, to move beyond, solely the ego, right, to become less egocentric, and also to obtain wisdom, right, by, under the right circumstances, in altered states of consciousness, whether that's dreams, or whatever technique is used to attain that altered state of consciousness, right? And artists do this quite often. Meditation is one way to do it, right? Because in the narrow bandwidth of our consciousness, of our ego, right, where we tend to think in very habitual ways. But if we can expand that our access to a larger consciousness, then that's where religious thinkers and artists, right, are able to start to link together ideas that usually we would not link, right? And so the creativity comes there spiritually and even artistically. It's very fascinating. I've enjoyed exploring, right, these issues with you. It's like the Quran says, right? The words of God are it's like deeper than the sea, right? So it's potentially infinite, right? So this topic.
Okay, we will continue with our next topic next time.